Hello, and welcome to Yesterday, Today, and Forever, a virtual ministry of the Churches of Christ. It is our desire to present to the 21st century person the faith of the first century Christians. We seek unity through the acceptance of the faith that was once and for all time delivered unto the saints, a system of faith which first began to be spoken by our Lord prior to his crucifixion, and was later confirmed to the saints by the apostles and inspired writers of the New Testament. Thus a faith from yesterday to today and into forever. Our speaker is Brian Barrett, who preaches for the church at Bear Branch, in Spurlockville, West Virginia. We encourage all persons interested in the faith of our fathers to open their Bibles, as we search the Scriptures, for these eternal truths, which can lead Christians back into unity as the family of God. Now, here is Brian.
Good morning. We're studying this morning in the book of John, chapter 2, begin in verse 12. John 2 and verse 12. Looking at some of the early days of Jesus' ministry and studying in that after he was there at the wedding in Cana of Galilee, it says in verse 12, after this he went down to Capernaum, he and his mother and his brethren and his disciples, and they continued there not many days. Capernaum kind of becomes a center of Jesus' ministry. We think of Jesus as Jesus of Nazareth, that is usually his hometown, and that's the way many people think of him. But Nazareth is somewhat off the beaten path. And so Jesus spends a great deal of time in the city of Capernaum because there is much more social interaction and a lot of things going on there, more so than in his hometown. And throughout his ministry, we will see him in around Capernaum. A lot of times he is there around the Sea of Galilee. He spends a great deal of time going back and forth across the sea, the lake, whatever you want to think of it as he continues to spread the gospel and people are following him. And so as we look at this, there, as what we perceive him to be the eldest brother, and now he becomes a religious leader that people are following. After the wedding was over, he goes to Capernaum, and it says he and his mother and his brethren and his disciples, and they continued there not many days. And so we think of Jesus as somewhat, at this time, the head of the family. If we understand that, of course, Jesus was the firstborn of Mary, and then his other brothers and sisters, which we read about in the Scriptures. And so we have his mother traveling with him, and we have his brethren following with him. And now he has begun to assemble a group of disciples or followers. And so we have a pretty good little band of individuals who are traveling together. Now, I can't say throughout all of the Scriptures how often all of these individuals are traveling with Jesus, but a lot of times when we just see Jesus and his disciples and those kind of things mentioned, we also find places where his brethren and his mother and others came wanting to see him. And so there are several individuals who are now with Jesus, following along with him. But going back to Capernaum, it says that he was not there many days. In other words, he was there only for a short period of time. So we kind of get a little bit of a time frame from what John is telling us as to the beginning of Jesus' earthly ministry according to his writings. We have seen so far day 1, day 2. We've counted those things off, and so he goes back after the wedding to Capernaum. That was the third day. The wedding was on the third day, and after that they traveled back to Capernaum, and he wasn't there very long. And the next verse tells us that the Jews' Passover was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. When is the Passover? It's in the first month of the Jewish year, usually corresponding to our March or April. Their calendar kind of is out of sync with ours, but it usually falls within the month of either March or April. And so we can kind of get a picture. The Passover and these, the unleavened bread happened sort of at the end of what we think of as the winter season, which was the rainy season there. And so it would only be likely that after the end of the rainy season, that's a perfect time for a wedding. We usually around here choose May. Usually May's a halfway decent month. It's not so much this May, but in the early part of the year, many people who have been betrothed and have set these things up. So the early part of the spring, the end of the rainy season where people can travel, we see that Jesus and his mother and his family and his disciples were there at the wedding. And so whether that was in March or whether that was in April, we kind of get an idea of the start of his work as John lays it out here with beginning to call and recruit and bring disciples on. And after that, they go down to Jerusalem, and we know that the Passover starting on the 10th day of the first month and going on from there on into the Feast of Unleavened Bread following that. And it was a week, a little over a week, somewhere there around the Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, all of these type things associated with that. And of course, in getting into Jerusalem, wherever one normally went to, they had to make plans to prepare for the Passover meal, where they were going to have it. Now, whether Jesus already had a place, I would think that as old as Jesus was, that there was probably a place, perhaps even some other family members that were there in Jerusalem that they may have stayed with during the time of the Passover. But we can't say that with any certainty, but we would think as old as Jesus was, and Mary and his brethren and all those, this isn't the first time that they have came to Jerusalem for the Passover. And so he brings all of these individuals with him into Jerusalem. This was a major feast of the Jewish people. The Passover, the Day of Pentecost, the Feast of Tabernacles, these three especially, all the men of Israel were required to make their presence at the temple under the law of Moses. Now others came with them many times, their wives and families, and others would come with them, but the men were most definitely required to be here 3 times a year. So Jesus, beginning his earthly ministry in what we would think of, according to John, in the spring, and coming into Jerusalem during the Passover, when all of the males that were at least seeking to be faithful to the law of Moses would be there. Jesus appears with his disciples and his family, and we see him begin to interact with both religious leaders, and we also see him to begin to interact with others around him. Does anybody have any questions, comments as we can get to this point? And so they went up to Jerusalem and found in the temple those that sold oxen and sheep and doves and the changers of money sitting. And when he had made a scourge of small cords, he drove them all out of the temple and the sheep and the oxen, and poured out the changers' money and overthrew the tables, and said unto them that sold doves, Take these things hence, make not my Father's house an house of merchandise. And his disciples remembered that it was written, The zeal of thine house hath eaten me up. Psalm 69, verse 9. This is an interesting way to introduce yourself to the religious leaders and the people who were a part of the what we think of as had been a part of the traditional working and operating of the temple. And so if you want to get attention, I suppose this would be the best way to do it. And you could go over into the corner of the temple somewhere and begin to teach and talk and to do those things. But Jesus chooses to make his presence known in what we would kind of call splash. He does it in a very unique way. Now, if you had, you have to kind of understand this. There's lots of reasons behind it, but if Jesus went up and he sat in a corner of the court of the Gentiles, where the plaza was there, most people came and went. If he just sat there and a few people came and listened to him preach and discuss things with him, and then they went home, he'd have a few people who would be aware of what he was doing and teaching, maybe a miracle or two. But people don't generally do a lot of talking about something like that, and so Jesus uses another very interesting way of getting attention and getting things broadcast. We may not talk a lot about this new preacher who was there in the temple, but I will guarantee you that after he turned the money changers' tables over and he made a scourge out of small cords and he drove the animals out of the temple and he did all these things, how much you want to bet most of Jerusalem knew about it by the end of the day? And have Facebook for people standing around with their phones taking pictures and videos and putting it up on their Facebook page. And, I don't know if there was a Jerusalem Herald, but, it didn't end up on the front page of the local newspaper. And it wasn't on the evening news broadcast. We don't have those things. But I can pretty much guarantee you, with all those people that were there in the temple, now whether they thought Jesus was a lunatic or whether they thought Jesus was right in what he was doing, at this point doesn't really matter. He has their attention. They're going to want to see what he's going to do next. And so Jesus not only gets the attention of the people who are there in that portion of the temple, but do you suppose that news of what he had done in the courts there spread on up into the temple to the place where the Sanhedrin met and where the priests and all of them were? Do you think they heard about it? There's this crazy man down there in the in the common court, the common area, the court of the Gentiles. There's this crazy man. He's turning everything upside down, chasing people with a scourge, animals. He's really, upset people. Now, the prophecy, of course, speaks of it as the fact that the zeal of thine house hath eaten me up. Verse 17 from Psalm 69:9, as we've said. And he talks about not making his father's house a house of merchandise. As we've spoke of on other occasions, no matter where you go, it seems that they're always trying to take advantage of the tourist. Now, we perhaps would think of these individuals as pilgrims coming to the temple, and that's kind of a way to think of them. But in another, more general way, from a businessman's perspective, these are tourists that are coming and going. And anywhere there are tourists, there's always those individuals who sometimes, may not be the most appropriate term, but they take advantage of the opportunity. Now, there may be honest people who are just trying to help that were involved in this. But we have to also understand there was money to be made. There was money to be made because of the sheep that were used in the feast of the Passover. Everybody was going to be eating lamb or sheep, a goat, a yearling, young lamb, young goat. They were going to be there. Somebody had to sell that. Where would you find them? Well, everybody's coming to the temple, and that's where they're going to offer the goat, and then it will be taken back to the house, or the sheep, the lamb, and will be used that night in the Passover meal. So, and then for people who were coming, making various other sacrifices, there were, as the scripture shows from Leviticus, the 1st, 2nd chapter, there were those who sold doves for those who couldn't afford the larger animals, and those on up. So they were selling a little bit of everything. They had, as we can see here, they had the sheep and oxen, the cat, what we think of as the cattle, those kind of things. And they also had doves for those who had less to spend. But they all were at least everybody had an opportunity to spend some money there at the temple, whether they were buying doves or ox or something in between, in the midst of all of this, plus preparation for the Passover itself. And along with that are the money changers. And because the Jews had a command about graven images and not making graven images and using graven images, there was an issue with the coins on Rome's money. Whose face generally appeared? Caesar. And so many of the Jews had problems of taking a graven image into the temple area, which generally we're talking about not the main, what I call the main plaza or the court of the Gentiles, but we're talking about going up into the court of the women, was also the area where the treasury was, and people deposited their contributions to the temple there. And so the Jewish people had difficulty bringing these graven image coins into the temple and depositing them into the treasury. It was a conscience kind of situation. And so what happened is it's not just transferring Roman coins to Jewish coins in the sense of some kind of transaction like American money to Canadian money when you cross the border, those kind of things. It had more to do with the fact that they didn't want these coins with someone else's image being in the temple of God. And the Jewish coins that were minted by the Jewish nation usually had wheat, plants, just lots of kind of pictures, not of any kind of, generally not of animals or people, so as to kind of stay away from that graven image thing. And so, because many of the people coming there were carrying with them Roman coins with this inscription of Caesar on it, there was an opportunity to exchange that for Jewish coins that they could deposit into the treasury. And we pretty much understand that they weren't probably doing this out of the goodness of their heart, just like they weren't giving away sheep and oxen and everything else. So there was an exchange rate of something. People made something for exchanging the coins for their service. And so these things, to me, though they have a religious aspect, there's also what I like to call the classic tourist trap. People taking advantage of people. And Jesus saw that they had made the temple a place of merchandise and of business, not necessarily the business of God, but of selling animals. And there were stalls and there were places where you could go and buy animals. While it may have been convenient to do it here, that's not what the temple was set apart for. The temple was set apart for the worship of God.
Maybe a strange question, but where did the gambling part come in there? Was it supposed to be gambling going on there too?
No, they were primarily changing money, exchanging money and selling animals. It was more or less an open market, and I know there were animals and all that were brought in there, but I can't imagine what it must have smelled like. Of course, I guess at that time you get used to things, and so you don't pay a lot of attention to it. But with a lot of sheep and oxen and animals there, you can just imagine what was taking place in that area while they had the animals there. And in a way, you kind of almost look at that as a way of defiling the temple in and of itself. I know you had to bring animals in there, and in the slaughter of animals there was, yeah. I mean, it was a place where you could come and you could bring a sheep with you from your house or a lamb. You could bring doves with you, a sacrifice. You could lead your own ox there. But that was inconvenient, and so it was more convenient for many people traveling to just bring their purse with them, as we do today. Just whip out the MasterCard, Visa, American Express, and get what you need when you get there. And that's kind of what was taking place. They were taking advantage of the fact that it was difficult for people to travel. And if you look at a map and you have people who are traveling just in the Holy Land itself, traveling from up around the area where Jesus was in Capernaum, they're going to be coming down around the Sea of Galilee. They're going to go around, generally they went around the area of Samaria, coming back into Judah, going down into Jerusalem. And so by our kind of terminology, it was a hike. And a lot of those did it on foot, did it in stages from city to city, town to town, place to place. And so it was much easier just to bring money. And people bringing money makes it easier for people who sell things to have all kinds of items there available to them. But you can, as we see here, it goes on and says, but in verse 18, then answered the Jews and said unto him, what sign showest thou us, seeing that thou doest these things? John a lot of times uses the phrase, the Jews. And it's hard to distinguish sometimes if he's talking about just the general Jews, people in general, or is he talking about those people who are in authority? And it would seem from the context in a lot of these places that he is not, being questioned necessarily by the common man or woman on the street kind of Jew, but it's talking about those who had a position of leadership in one capacity or another, because, the average person, they wouldn't be asking Jesus, by what authority. That's what we're really here. What kind of authority do you have to come into this place and do the things that you're doing? And so that's what they say. What sign showest thou unto us, seeing that thou doest these things? And what authority? What sign? What are you going to show us? What token? What proof are you going to give us that you have authority to come in here and tell us how to run the temple? Jesus answered and said unto them, Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. Then said the Jews, 46 years was this temple in building, and wilt thou rear it up in 3 days? But he spake of the temple of his body. When therefore he was risen from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this unto them, and they believed the scripture and the word which Jesus had said. One of the accusations that was brought against Jesus by many of those false witnesses and others who were bringing charges against him in Matthew 26:61, they bring up charges that he had said that if they would destroy the temple or tear down the temple, he could build it back in 3 days. And of course, John rightly inserts into the midst of all of this that he was talking about his physical body, and the disciples understood what he was saying and what he was teaching and what was going on after that. After that third day, he was resurrected from the dead. After he had risen from the dead, they remembered what he had said, and then that helped them to understand the scriptures and to have more faith in Christ and the things that he was doing. Now, when he says this, you can already see that Jesus is in some way almost speaking to parables already with the Jewish leaders, knowing their hearts and their attitudes. He could have went into all kinds of discussions. He could have done something for them to show them his power, and he could have done many things that day. But he chose to say, tear down this temple and I'll rebuild it in 3 days. That's almost like the parables. It's kind of shielded. It has a veil over the things that he's saying. There is room for interpretation and misinterpretation. And they did misinterpret what he said. The temple that was being built there in Jerusalem at the time was a temple that Herod had constructed and had in the construction phase. And it had been in building, according to this verse, already some 40 years. That's a long time. It's like a West Virginia interstate. It just never ends. And so in Jerusalem, Herod had started the building of the temple, and they were continually adding on to it. What I have read, because it was the center of Jewish faith and religion at the time, they continued to add things to the temple to make things better, I suppose, along the way. And so up to this point, they've already been working some 40 years with various carpenters and stone masons and those who work in metal, gold, silver, brass, just all the different things. And so it took us 40 years to get this far, and you think you can do it in 3 days. Now, it would have been easy to say, well, I'm talking about my physical body, and believe it or not, in the future, people will want to put me to death, and they will, and I will rise again on the third day. He could have went into all of that, but he doesn't. And one of the things that we see here, I'm going to drop down to 24 as we start winding down for this morning, but it says, "But Jesus did not commit himself unto them because he knew all." Now in italics it has men, but it says he knew all. "And needed not that any should testify of man, for he knew what was in man." Jesus did not at this time choose. He could have done many things, as we said, but he chose not to get into those things. He chose not to commit himself at that time fully. At this time, it seems to me he's wanting to spark attention, discussion, topics. Start talking about me. John had prepared the way, and he has picked up disciples along the way, as we've seen, that were prepared by John. Now he's reaching out to a larger group of individuals, and these are individuals who are going to be talking about him for different reasons. Some because of the miracles that he did back in 23. It says, "Now when he was in Jerusalem at the Passover in the feast day, many believed in his name when they saw the miracles which he did." Now, many that believed are what I would call the normal, everyday Jewish people versus the Jews, who John seems to make reference to the Jewish leaders, those who were in charge. The Jewish leaders were upset, demanding proof that he had authority to do the things, or by what authority he did that, and they would challenge him many times with that. But he did perform some miracles, apparently not for the Jewish leaders, but among the people, and many of the people seeing the miracles which he did believed. Yes?
Back at the wedding, he had to told some people go fill the pots and fill the containers. He could have just well said containers be full.
Yeah.
And made it like that.
I don't always understand why Jesus chooses. It's interesting to think about why he does things the way he does. I mean, sometimes he can do a miracle from long distance, and he doesn't have to physically be there, touch them. And then other times he chooses in his miracles to lay his hands on them. Sometimes he made clay and put it on a guy's eyes and told him to go wash, when he could just as easily said, your sight be restored, or just restored his sight. I really don't, we can come up with all kinds of different reasons why, but I think maybe part of that has to do with the fact that he knew really the hearts of individuals, and sometimes he just knew what people needed at that time to be the most convincing to them, and what would bring the most attention and the most convincing along the way. And he took advantage, I guess, of that to get people to speak and to talk about that and to build up a reputation. And so some had a good story of all the things that happened along the way, and some just rejoiced in the miracle that was done. Our time's up for this morning. I thank you for your attention and your questions, comments. Lord willing, we will in the next class begin into chapter 3. Thank you.
Why not make this the day that you and your family seek out the Church of Christ in your community? We encourage you to attend one of our worship times or Bible studies. God's grace, truth, and salvation is truly worth finding and knowing. May God bless and keep you, as we walk together in His truth. And remember, as always, the Churches of Christ salute you. Our new programs are posted to Facebook and YouTube on Thursday afternoon, and they should be available for viewing by 7 p.m. We also encourage our viewers to visit our website at www.thechurchesofchrist.life. We ask that you like us on Facebook and share our programs. On YouTube, please share and subscribe for notifications. This program was pre-recorded.